Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the forced mass migration that no one in the West wanted, and the effect as these numbers of third world black and brown peasants increases in the West, the effect that's having on elections and what elections are looking like today in the West. And I'll use sort of Australia as an example, but with the globalists wanted to force as many black and brown peasants, the surplus populations of the world that aren't integrated into any economy. They wanted to force them into the West, or bring them to the West rather, and impose and force them on the local white population. Nobody wanted this. Nobody voted for it. Nobody asked for it. Nobody was asked about it. It was just done. So these people are coming to the West, and because of multiculturalism, or not exclusively because of that, Indians who came to Australia before multiculturalism still didn't integrate. So with multiculturalism now, there's not even a pretense at integration or assimilation or anything like that. They're racial enclaves, and they're very determined to keep it so, and to extract from the white people benefits for those various populations, Indians and Chinese, could be others. So Indian and Chinese being the biggest sort of groups. But so now in the thumbnail, you'll notice that's an Indian election sort of booth, if you like it, an Indian election in India. But if you come to Australia or parts of Australia, that effectively is what it looks like in Australia now at some of the areas where there's Indians running around all wearing their national costume, Sikhs wearing the turban, and I appreciate the religious relationship there. But nonetheless, you've come to the West because you want a better life, you want to be part of this economy, but you don't want to be part of the society. So other Indians wearing their national dress as well. The women sort of probably a bit more so than the men, but the men too. So you can go to election booths or election sort of stations in Australia, some of them, and you see all these different people from all over the world, all in their local local dress. So people from Africa wearing the African national costumes, or the costumes of the area from Africa that came from, Indians wearing the national ones, and so on and so forth. And you'd swear you're in another country. Now, just following on from that, there's a federal election campaign running in Australia. I think the voting's in a couple of weeks now, and various politicians are putting adverts out, online, and I've seen a few of them, and you'd be forgiven for thinking the politician might be white, but you'd be forgiven for thinking that they were in some other country, not Australia. So you see all the people. There's one I just looked at, people in the foreground that this white female politician was talking to, and they were all mostly Indian, but and then there was a few black people, a few other brown people, Middle Eastern from the looks of it, Afghani maybe, and the only white people you saw were in distant background. This is fucking Australia, for Christ's sake. I mean, 25 years ago, this was 97, 98% white. Look at it now, and even our white politicians are desperate to sell us out as quickly as they can to please their globalist masters. So, and looking at these adverts, I was sort of amazed. Holy fuck! Why aren't there any white people at foreground in these adverts? I'm sure there'll be some somewhere that are, and I get that, but certainly the ones I'm seeing, and the ones that seem to be given prime advertising position, as I say, the white people are all in background. All the foreground people are brown and black and so on. So this is yet another example of how the globalists have used our political class to our political class have just become globalist stooges and flunkies, just doing as they're told and running around, trying to eradicate white people and white history and white culture, white achievements and so on, and gladly, gleefully, eagerly, energetically doing so, selling us out. So there was one, that's just an example there. Now, I was looking at a few talk shows, kind of sort of the late night current affairs shows. They're on like 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night. It's usually quite banal subjects with equally banal, boring people. Not the sort of thing you'd see on prime time or anything like that. No way could it compete with the daytime, Oprah or something. So they stick these shows on late at night, and they talk in a very pedestrian fashion about issues that actually are important. So here was one that I was looking at. It's from a little while ago, but they were looking at an area of London where the equivalent of the Republicans, the Conservatives in England, but the equivalent of the Republican government, Republican politicians were always winning these areas. And there's ones where it would change hands almost at every election. Republicans would win it one time. The Labor Party or the Democrats, if you look at the American parlance, would win it the next time. So that sort of thing. And and that was sort of 20 odd years ago. But today that's just wall to wall Labor Party or Democrats. And now the reason for that, these are the in terms of the mass migration, these are the areas of London that have been most radically changed. So they've gone from, again, 90% plus white 25 years ago to being 25% white today. That's how huge the shift's been in demographics and population makeup. So I wouldn't say the host or the compere of this current affairs show was a radical, leftist or anything like that. I was sympathetic to that position, but you sort of probably centre left. Now the politicians, there were 5 people on this particular discussion panel. 2 were former politicians. One was a well-known political writer and columnist, and I haven't heard of the others, but they seem to, have some understanding of how politics worked and that sort of stuff. So they were there. So you'd think that would be a reasonably decent sort of panel to have. And again, the compere was sort of moving it along, asking the questions and inviting comment and keeping it moving. So so anyway, the question came up: why have these inner city electorates, electoral districts, why have they gone from being completely conservative or Republican to being absolutely guaranteed Democrat, sort of Labor? And why have the marginal ones that used to flip almost every election, why have they gone hard Democrat or again Labor in the UK? So now it's obvious. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or anything to know that these areas here have received the most intensive demographic change in probably all of England. So that's the reason why they've gone. The white population's been obliterated almost, and that's all happened in 25 years. So that's the answer. That's why they've changed, because all these black and brown peasants have come in and they vote for the people that give them the most handouts, and that's the Labor Party or the Democrats in this case. And Democrat machinery and apparatchiks and activists are just absolutely thick on the ground in these areas, making sure that they stay Democrat or again Labor in the UK. So that's the reason. So when the question came up, why have these electoral districts changed from being Republican to being Democrat? I don't know. It's a complicated question. I'm not sure I've really got the answers. Says one guy who was really a career politician. He obviously knew, but he was too terrified to say. Then the other politician or former politician, I think there was. Yes, I agree. It really is a tough question. We'd have to study it more. Now, at this stage, the compere, should have jumped in and said, well, do you think the fact that it's gone from 95% white to 25% white in quite a short space of time. Do you think that might have anything to do with it? Do you think it might have something to do with it that the people coming there are illiterate in their own language, let alone English? Do you think it might have something to do with these millions of people coming in and forming racial ghettos and so on and so, that was an obvious question to ask, but the compere didn't ask it. This issue is so not allowed to be talked about that it's absolutely amazing. It's stunning, in fact. Obviously that's the reason why they changed. Not one of the people on the panel would say why. None of them would even touch the immigration. The word immigration wasn't even mentioned. Demographics wasn't mentioned. There just wasn't any. They just pretended they had no idea that it was some incredibly complex issue that just nobody knew what it was. I mean, what bullshit. Of course these people knew. They knew full well. But for some reason they were too terrified, and it wasn't polite. They're not polite people. Too terrified to talk about it. And the compere of the show was too terrified to even ask the question directly. Even the fact that he asked the question why was an invitation for any of those people to say, well, look, this is why. And they all knew, and that's obviously the reason why the mass migration being forced into Western countries. And that's an example of it in England, and we see it here, of course, in Australia. Now, these groups, that come, I mean, the Indians as an example, Chinese too, Filipinos, it doesn't matter. They come from countries that are basket case corrupt, and they see everything along the lines of who do I have to bribe to get something done. Not the white societies don't have that, they do, but nowhere near the extent of these places. The idea of elections, free and fair elections, they just laugh in your face at the idea that those would be valuable to any society. If you relate their lack of or the incredible presence of corrupt behaviour and so on, if you say, well, maybe that's got something to do with your countries being poor basket cases where you walk over dead bodies in the street. No. Corruption's efficient. If I want something done today, all I got to do is bribe someone, and bingo, it's done. Corruption is how it works. This idea of the working hard and the best product and wins and everything, that's bullshit. Just fucking bribe somebody, okay? And they've got no concept of how that destroys and undermines wealth. So they come here and want to sort of replicate it, and so there's a sort of a soft corruption goes on. So a political party will approach sort of Indian, for example, could be Chinese, whatever, community leaders and say, okay, what about we give some really prestigious, well-paying jobs to you, and we'll make sure you get a position in Parliament. We'll make sure your daughter's hired as a very well-paid consultant. We'll make sure your son gets a job here, and we'll look after the other community leaders, and we'll give you this and we'll give you that. You want a community hall, then not a problem, done deal. So they bribe the sort of the heavies, if you like, of those communities in order to get their vote. These people in turn then tell their fellow countrymen to well, this is how you vote and this is what you do and so on, and they a lot of them are peasants, a lot of them just follow along. So that's a sort of soft form of corruption that happens in the West. But even the people that are given the juiciest fruits of what the West has to offer still don't integrate. As an example, there's a guy in the United States, and he's changed his name to Jack or Billy or something like some very Western sounding name, and Billy Bob, whatever it was. So they've given this guy like a governorship, or I think it's a senator. No, it was a governorship. Might be a senator. I think it was a governorship of one of the states. They gifted him. It's a Democrat state. Democrats will win there all the time. So they gifted him the governorship there, and he gives himself again the American name, all that sort of thing. But he came as a 18 or 19 years old to the United States, sent back to India for the bride. His children that are now in their early 20s are sending back to India for brides and husbands. When they're not in front of the camera, they walk around in their Indian garb. There's zero integration. They hang around with Indian people. They do a bit of pressing the flesh with the white folks because they kind of got to do it. The guy's the governor, for goodness sakes. But otherwise, they live a completely Indian life. All their vacations are back to India to visit the relatives in the village of their ancestors and so on. So this is how our democracy is being indirectly undermined. It's not by direct corruption, but by this multiculturalism and the idea of you've got to buy the votes of these corrupt people who still live the same corrupt ways that they did, maybe not quite as bad, but the same corrupt ways as they did in India, and who still, or China, and still see the way they were doing it back there as the right way and the proper way and the only way to go about things. If you ask, well, why is your country such a dirt poor shithole basket case, and the country you've come to in the West is so rich? Do you think there's a difference in the way that the country's managed and how the economy's structured and these sort of things? And they will concede that the corruption sometimes gets a bit excessive in India, but they no. The only reason you white folks are rich because you stole it all from us brown folks. The only reason we're poor, the brown folks, is because you fucking white folks stole it all. Now we've come to Australia or the West generally. We've gone to college. We've managed to learn now that all you white folks are Hitler, and you should be giving us compensation for all the evil Nazi fascist things that you did to us over the centuries ago. Oh, okay, well that's a really comprehensive understanding of the reality of things. So that's the thing there. And what got me onto this was seeing all those adverts of Australian white politicians, and no white voters, or the only white voters again being in background. I thought, gee, how did it come to this? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.